Chapter 16, Locomotor and Non-Locomotor Skills. When we talked about fundamental skills way back in Chapter 1, we talked about the basic skills needed in order to perform most of the PE activities in PE. Well, fundamental skills include two major categories. One major category is locomotor skills. Another major category is the non-locomotor skills. Very basic. Anything that we can do to participate throughout life involves locomotor skills, moving from point A to point B, and your non-locomotor skills is not quite so definitive of a definition of it. As I already said, basic or functional skills is another term for fundamental skills, skills that we need to function in everyday life. Basic human movements is what I want you to know. That can be identified by a single verb. For instance, I want you to know walking, twisting, running, jumping, or stretching. These are basic fundamental skills that we do throughout the day, and that verb is our indicator of what skill we are doing. So this pattern of development, I want you to know, for learning these physical skills develops from general to specific, large motor movement to fine motor movement. So in general, walking is large motor movement where the large major muscles are going. And then we have specific movements and fine motor movements where we might use just our fingertips to catch a ball as a small ball, wiffle ball, yarn ball, as opposed to using our whole arms to catch a big beach ball or any type of big lightweight ball. So general to specific, large motor movements to fine motor movements. So if it's important that you know that in order to learn these fundamental skills, it requires us to practice these basic locomotor and non-locomotor skills through many different types of repetitions. So I want you to know repeating these fundamental skills over a wide range of activities will help ensure that those kids are going to perform them in varying conditions, and that's how they're going to learn these fundamental skills, because we're going to offer it in many different ways, different size balls, different distances, dominant, non-dominant hand. So this is how they're going to learn these fundamental skills. What is our definition of locomotor skill? Moving the body from one place to another, or like I like to say, from point A to point B, or projecting the body upwards. So I definitely want you to know the different types of locomotor skills, and we're going to go into great detail of each one of these in this chapter. But you need to know walking, running, skipping, galloping, leaping, sliding, jumping, and hopping. All of these, except for walking, can be used when you do whistle mixer in class. Okay? And as we said earlier, gross motor coordination involving large muscles is our locomotor skills. Okay? Non-locomotor skills, they're performed without any basic movement from place to place. It's not as well defined as locomotor skills. But what are the non-locomotor skills that I want you to know? Bending and stretching, pushing and pulling, twisting and turning, rocking, swaying, and balancing. Okay, so know these types of locomotor skills and the types of non-locomotor skills. The first locomotor skill we want to talk about is walking. Each foot moves alternately, with one foot always touching the ground on the floor. But what I want you to know here is your toes should be pointing straight forward ahead of you, and the arms should be swinging freely from the shoulders in opposition to the feet. In opposition to the feet. What does that mean? When my right foot is forward, my left arm should be forward. When my left foot is forward, my right arm is forward. And that's where we get our sense of balance. For each one of these locomotor skills, you're going to have instructional cues. These are things that you would include in your lesson focus because somebody has locomotor skills for their weekly plan. So whatever skills you're teaching that day, these are the instructional cues that you would go over with the students. But what's also good about each locomotor skill, they have suggested movement patterns. And these are the suggestions, like for walking, there's 1 through 28. So what you would pick several of these in order for your lesson focus, for the students, how are they going to practice walking? And we're not going to practice walking for 10 minutes. We're going to have 2 other locomotor skills also. But how are they going to practice it? So you'd pick some of these. Like number 1 says, walk in different directions, changing direction on signal. So that's one you could do, and you could do that for about 30 seconds or so. Then you might try number 2, while walking, lift each knee and slap with the hands on each step. Just a little something different. Number 3, walk on the heels, toes, and sides of the feet. So for a while, they might walk on their heels. Short while, then for a short while, they might walk on their toes. Then for a short while, walk on the sides of their feet. If you want to do that one, you don't have to do that one. There's numerous others. There's 25 others to choose from. So they suggest movement patterns for you to use in your lesson focus. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's here. You just need to read through it, decide which ones you want to do, and that's what would be included in your lesson focus to teach them walking. Also, in the locomotor skills, you also have a second category called rhythmic activities. So on page 338, number 1 says walk forward 1 phrase, 8 counts, and change direction. Continue to change at the end of each phrase. So you're teaching them how the basic count of 8 when we're doing rhythmic activities. So they're giving you all types of suggestions here. It's just a matter of you reading through it and deciding that you like it and you want to try it and use it. Our second locomotor skill is running. So what's different about running compared to walking? Well, here it is. Running is moving fast so that both feet briefly leave the ground. If you remember for walking, we said both feet are in contact touching the ground. So when running, it's for a split second or half a second where neither foot is touching the ground. I don't know if you ever thought of that before, but I want you to know that you're moving so fast that both feet briefly leave the ground. Here again are some instructional cues that you would use to teach running. And here again on page 339 are some suggested movement patterns 1 through 21. Read through them, decide on 3 or 4 of them that would last a couple of minutes, and then move on to your next locomotor skill. And then they also have rhythmic activities that you could possibly use. Like number 1, walk during a phrase of music, which we know is an 8 count, and then run for an equal length of time. Very simple, but you would do more than that, okay? You would pick 2 or 3 more numbers. Our third locomotor movement is hopping. I want you to know hopping involves propelling your body up and down on the same foot. The same foot, okay? So again, we have instructional cues and suggested movement patterns. Anytime you do hopping, I would strongly suggest you have them alternate feet because it's hard. It's tiring to hop on the same foot for a lengthy period of time. Like number 1 for the suggested movement pattern says hop on one foot, then hop on the other, using patterns such as 1 right foot, 1 left foot, 2 right foot, 2 left foot, and so on. Our fourth locomotor skill is jumping. So what's the difference between hopping and jumping? Jumping, you take off on 2 feet and you land on 2 feet. Difference between hopping and jumping. So I definitely want you to know the difference there. Again, we have instructional cues and suggested movement patterns, but I want you to take note because I want you to know swinging your arms forward as fast as possible is an important instructional cue to help people to jump and get up and moving. Bending the knees is very important also. Trying to land lightly can be challenging, but you want to land on your with your knees bent. Okay. Again, we have suggested movement patterns for when you're teaching jumping, and we also have some rhythmic activities, 1 through 4, that you could possibly use when teaching jumping. I like this picture here of the girl jumping because it shows using of hoops, because somebody has games with hoops, or you see how you just make up something where they jump from the pink to the yellow to the purple, then back to the pink hoop, and then people could be behind them. So this is a good little demonstration of jumping. Sliding is another locomotor skill. I want you to know the little description of sliding. Sliding is very similar to a gallop, but it is done with the body moving sideways in a 1-count movement. Slide to the right with your left foot, slide to the right with your right foot, slide to the left, slide to the right. So you lead the foot to the side, and the other foot quickly follows. And it's important that you understand and know for test purposes, we need to stress balance and stability. That's where our emphasis should be, on balance when they're doing it and stability. Again, you have your instructional cues, and again, you have your suggested movement patterns and rhythmic activities. Galloping is another locomotive skill, very similar to sliding, but your body is facing forward, and you have a more upward motion compared to the sliding. Your progression is made in a more forward direction. There are your instructional cues, 1 foot in front of the other, lead with the other foot. Make high gallops is another instructional cue. They have 6 suggested movement patterns, and they have a little, well, they're saying for rhythmic, they don't have rhythmic. Well, they're saying because galloping is essentially rhythmic, many of the previous described patterns can be done to rhythm. Use music phrases to signal. So for the suggested movement patterns 1 through 6, you could do it with a rhythmic type of instruction. Leaping. Leaping is elongated steps to cover distance or move over low obstacles. That you usually combine leaping with running. You're doing a series of leaps and then or some running, because it's very difficult to do leaps by themselves for a long period of time. So again, we have some instructional cues: push off and reach, go up and over, land lightly, use your arms to help you gain height. Again, we have some suggested movement patterns. Leaping in different directions is number 1. Number 2, see how high you can leap. But these are very short activities, so you would need several of these if you include in order to teach your lesson. And then it's followed by rhythmic. This is the one that I was thinking of. In leaping, this is what they're saying. Rhythm cannot easily be applied to this movement. So you don't want to try to incorporate rhythmic activities when you're teaching leaping. Here's our little diagram of a student leaping. Not much to it, but you're covering a large distance. Look how she went from standing with 2 feet and then took that giant leap forward with her right foot. The last locomotor skill is skipping, which is the most challenging of all of them. I want you to know, how do you skip? I want you to know it's a series of step hops. Step, hop, step, hop. step, hop, step, hop. You do it with alternate feet. So you step with the right foot, then you hop with the right foot. Step with the left foot, hop with the left foot. And that's how you begin to teach them skipping. Uh, they say one method is what I just said, making sure it's done on the balls of the feet. Another way to teach skipping would be to have the children hold a large ball, about 9-inch ball, in front of them at their waist, and then make them take a step with one foot and then raise the other knee to touch the ball. It stimulates them for the hop. And then you repeat it with the other foot and then the opposite knee. So some suggestions. The second half of the chapter is on the non-locomotor skills, and the first one they discuss is bending. So basically, bending is a movement at a joint, teaching them how to bend, why it needs to bend, why does your body need to bend, how can you combine bends in various movements. These are some suggestions on how we can teach our students. Instructional cues. And then we want to explain to students how bending is used with other skills. This is important that they understand why bending is important. Suggested movement patterns to teach bending is on page 344. I want you to know the difference between rocking and swaying. Rocking occurs when the center of gravity shifts fluidly from one body part to the other. So what are we talking about? Where's the center of gravity? Our center of gravity is our waist, our midriff area, our stomach area. That's the center of gravity, okay? So when our body is rounded, that's rocking, okay? Swaying is a slower movement and somewhat more controlled than the rocking. So it can be challenging to teach them how to rock and sway. There's your instructional cues. And then on page 345, there's your suggested movement patterns. For non-locomotor, you're not going to have rhythmic suggestions and so forth because it can't be done. It's done with locomotor movements. Swinging is our second non-locomotor skill, moving the body part somewhat like a swinging rope or a clock pendulum, using your arms and your legs. You know, I can see pendulum swing like they do to pitch in softball, in slow pitch. You know, your arm does a pendulum swing or your arm does a pendulum swing whenever you are bowling with the ball. So these are examples of swinging. And then there's some suggested movement patterns. Number 2, make up swinging patterns with your arms. Okay? Combine them with a step pattern, forward and back. They just give you some ideas and read them, see which ones you like. Turning is rotating around the long axis of your body. Turning and twisting are sometimes terms that are used interchangeably to designate the movement of the body parts, but turning refers to movement of the body as a whole, and it's all initiated by a twist. There are some instructional cues for you, and then they give you some suggested movement patterns. While standing, turn your body to the left and right, clockwise and counterclockwise, looking forward but twisting at your shoulders and your waist. That's number 1. Number 2, turn to face north, turn to face east, turn to face south, west. Post directions on the wall. You're teaching them directions as well as teaching them how to turn. Twisting is rotating a selected body part, not the whole body, selecting a body part around its own long axis. There's a picture in your book showing the girl twisting. Joints of different body parts are used for twisting, okay? Your spine, neck, shoulders, hips, ankles, wrists, okay? And they give you some suggested movement patterns on page 347, 1 through 14. Like the last one says, twist as if you're hitting a golf ball. Twist number 12, twist like a pretzel, like a licorice stick. There's all different suggestions, but they are so quick and short, and they don't last but 15 seconds, maybe 30 seconds each one. So you'd have to pick several. Stretching on page 347 moves body parts away from the body center. Moving a joint through the range of movement is very necessary to maintain and increase flexibility. So true. Stretching. And to prevent injuries too. So here's your instructional cues, suggested movement patterns. Number 2, stretch your arms, stretch your legs, stretch your feet in as many different directions as possible. Number 6, lie on the floor and see if you can stretch 2, 3, 4, or 5 body parts at once. All different suggestions. See which one you like, or several that you like. Pushing is a controlled, forceful action against some type of object to move the body away from the object, or to move the object in a desired direction by applying force to it. So here's some instructional cues. Broaden your foot base. Very true. To give you some stability, give you some force. Push steadily, evenly, lower yourself. Correct? Okay? And then there's some suggested movement patterns on page 348. Stand near a wall. Push it from an erect position. Then push with the knees bent and one foot behind the other. In which position can you push harder? So, just giving you suggestions on how to teach pushing. Here's a picture in the book showing how to work on pushing. Notice their feet, okay? Notice their feet. They're not together. Their knees are bent, bending at the waist, pushing, okay? So this is a good little diagram to show how to teach pushing. Pulling, I want you to know, is a controlled, forceful action that moves an object closer to the body, or the body closer to the object. Here are your instructional cues. Again, remember, look, lower yourself. How do we lower ourselves? Bend your knees. Widen your base. Spread your feet apart. Okay, and pull steadily. And then you have your 14 suggested movement patterns on page 349. The last little very small section in chapter 16 is on fleeing, chasing, and tagging. Many of your physical education games involve fleeing, chasing, and tagging. Your tag games, okay? So what are some points we need to stress whenever we're doing our tag games? We need to make sure they're running under control and just not all flying everywhere. Number 2, you need to make sure they get in a moderate crouch position. I want you to know that. Remember we talked about the feet wider, okay? The person who is fleeing, and this position will enable them to move quickly from side to side. So crouch position, feet wider apart, so that they can move quicker from side to side. I also want you to know this fleeing child, they can adapt to the faking. They become very good at faking, which basically you're moving in one direction before going to the other. You want to be on the balls of your feet. What are the balls of the feet? Near your toes. Okay, you always want to run on those, unless you're doing long distance running, and then you can do the heel toe, run on your heels. Make sure, I want you to know that their eyes are focused on the center of the dodger's body to avoid falling for a fake. Okay, so if you're the tagger and you're trying to tag someone, don't look at their head or shoulders, look at their waist. And that's to help you to successfully tag them. So know that. And then the tag should be gentle between the knees and the shoulders. Okay, not the head. All right, so those are some very good stress points that I want you to know about tagging and when we're playing tag games. So what are our takeaways from this chapter? The non-locomotor and locomotor skills are our basis for nearly all physical activities that the students are going to do in PE and throughout life. You see my little typo on non-locomotory? Should say non-locomotor. Our pattern of development is from general to specific, large motor movements to fine motor movements. And we want to definitely work on repetition, repetition, repetition when teaching these locomotor and non-locomotor skills. And the locomotor skills are rhythmic in nature. Okay, so you can perform these in a variety of settings. Here we have some good review and reflection questions. Why is teaching fundamental movements synonymous with providing instruction designed to learn a specific skill? We have to have fundamentals in order to teach any skill pertaining to sports, pertaining to cooperative games, for any type of games. So it's imperative that we have these fundamental movements because that's what they're going to be doing. They're going to be running or skipping or hopping to play a game, and they have to know how to do it. Which segment is the locomotor and non-locomotor movements typically practice? That should be your lesson focus with your guided practice. Number 3, how does learning fundamental skills correctly and quickly support the other PE outcomes within the PE curriculum? Basically, I said it earlier, we have to have it in order for them to progress, in order for them to use these locomotor fundamental skills, in order to play games and play sports and almost any activity. Number 4, how do you plan to assess students' ability to perform fundamental movement skills? You can look at the cues, you can look at the stress points, and you can use those as your assessment tool and check off if they're doing it correctly, especially for the step hop. The skipping, that one is a challenge to students in elementary, and some of them have a difficult time doing it. So this concludes Chapter 16. This concludes our test material for your midterm exam.